Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. The topic for today's webinar is developing non-lithium ion energy storage technologies to support California's clean energy goals. This webinar is being presented by the Clean Energy States Alliance, also known as CESA, and we have an excellent guest speaker with us today from the California Energy Commission. Before I pass it over to our panelists today, I'd like to go over a few quick webinar logistics. You have a couple of options to join the audio portion of today's webinar. You can connect via computer, mic, and speakers, or you can call in using a telephone. If you'd like to minimize the webinar console so that you can view our presentation full screen, you can click on the orange arrow that you see circled there. You can also click on that to expand the webinar console. And one of the things that you might like to do with the webinar console is to submit your questions and your comments. We encourage you to do that. We want to hear what you have to say and what your questions are. We'll save about 20 minutes at the end of our presentation for a Q&A with the audience, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. We encourage you to type your questions in when you think of them. Don't wait until the very end. And that gives you a better chance of getting your question answered. A final note, this webinar is being recorded. We'll send you an email with a link to a webinar recording and also a PDF of the webinar slides within about 24 to 48 hours. And we'll also be posting all of those webinar materials on CESA's website at cesa.org/webinars. So with that out of the way, I'd like to now pass it over to our host for today's webinar, Val Story. Val is a project director here at the Clean Energy States Alliance, and she is going to get us started. Val?
Thanks, Sam. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. As Sam mentioned, I'm a project director here at CESA, the Clean Energy States Alliance. We are a nonprofit organization. We're headquartered in Vermont, and as you can see on your screen, we're a membership-based organization working with the state clean energy funds and agencies that you see up on your screen right now. We serve as a venue for information exchange among these members, and we also provide policy and program support, and we work with states on all issues related to clean energy, including resiliency and environmental justice issues. Most of our energy storage work is run under our STAP project. That's the Energy Storage Technology Advancement Partnership Project, which you may be familiar with. It's a DOE-funded partnership project conducted under contract with Sandia National Labs. And through this partnership, we're working with states, municipalities, and other entities by facilitating and supporting energy storage demonstration projects and by providing technical, programmatic, and policy assistance. If you're interested in energy storage, which I assume you are, I encourage you to visit the STAP project page on CESA's website to learn more and to sign up for our newsletters. However, for today's webinar, we're taking a step away from advanced lithium-ion technologies to focus on emerging non-lithium ion storage solutions. We are going to be hearing about California's interest in looking beyond lithium battery solutions and how the California Energy Commission has been supporting for over a decade the development of technologies suitable for a variety of microgrid applications, for long duration storage, and for customer side of the meter applications. I just recently learned that the CEC has completed 5 of what I've been calling beyond batteries solicitation, and that they've awarded over 58 million in EPIC funds with over 47 million contributed in match or cost share funding. To set the stage for the need for energy storage in California, just to give you a little background, in 2018, California's Governor Brown signed SB 100, which established a landmark policy requiring that renewable energy technologies and zero carbon resources supply 100% of electric retail sales by 2045. So they're a real leader in this area. And what this did, this carbon-free goal accelerated the state's need for energy storage to from increasing amount of variable renewable energy resources. And today, to tell you more about how these beyond battery solicitations and accompanying research fit into California's clean energy goals, we have with us Mike Gravely. He's an engineer and team lead at California Energy Commission, and for over 20 years, he's worked both at the CEC and for private companies in energy storage. So we are pleased to have him here with us. Can't wait to hear about all the research and the demonstration projects that the CEC is supporting. Before I hand things over to Mike, just a quick reminder to our audience to please type your questions into the questions box, which is in the panel that should be on the right-hand side of your screen. And I encourage you all to type them in as you think of them instead of waiting until the end of the presentation. And we'll do a moderated Q&A after Mike's presentation. Mike, thanks for being here. I'll pass things over to you now.
Good morning and good afternoon for those on the East Coast, and thank you very much for this opportunity. I am excited to be able to discuss this. We will talk a little bit about lithium-ion, but the primary focus on this is non-lithium-ion technologies, and I'll explain why as we go forward. Next chart, please. So for those who aren't familiar with California's operation, I work in the California Energy Commission, the R&D division. We're about 100 people, and so we have three main programs that fund our research and development, the larger of which is the Electric Program Investment Charge, EPIC program. We're in the 9th year of that program, and we just last month received approval for 10 additional years for that program, and so we will receive between $130 and $140 million a year going forward for research, as you'll be seeing here today. We have a natural gas program and also a special fund program. Some of the funds comes from cap and trade, and one of those programs is a food incentive program that actually does a lot of energy storage microgrid work also. Next chart. So, as I mentioned, I joined the commission almost 20 years ago, and we've had a long history. I actually was hired for my energy storage background, and we partnered with DOE many years ago to do a large solicitation. The upper right corner was a technology that we demonstrated way back when with the California ISO, and now there are two 20-megawatt systems in the East Coast operating. We have a full spectrum of projects that exist, and I'll talk about the new ones, but flywheels, flow batteries, advanced batteries. We've looked at compressed air as well as pumped hydro, and we've also looked at thermal storage. So we have a history of doing projects, but I'll point out that we probably are doing, I have to say, 3 or 4 times more this year than we would in previous years. We typically would do 3 or 4 projects on a given year, and this year we're doing close to 25 projects that are all funded in the 2020 timeframe. Next chart. And also, microgrids are an interesting thing in California with the recent resiliency issues we've had with wildfires and PSPS events. Microgrids are a big topic, and energy storage is a key element of all microgrids of some type or the other for the resiliency, and also working in that. So part of the microgrid research we're doing in these 45 microgrids, probably at least 40 of those are actually operating with lithium-ion technology. So it's not like we're not evaluating and researching lithium-ion technology. We are, but the challenge is that we're trying to broaden the horizon of options as we go forward. And being a public agency, just like this event, we always share what we're learning in different public environments of technical reports and public workshops. Next chart. So one of the elements of microgrids is it's helped us get to a wide variety of end customer applications. Most of our research is on the customer side of the meter as opposed to the utility side of the meter in that area. And so critical facilities like medical centers, fire stations, hospital, or community centers, and different areas that have critical roles when there are contingencies. Critical facilities like maritime ports and military bases, communities that have in wildfire zones, communities that have special needs, and also communities out in the desert that have very low reliability are all candidates. And all those systems rely heavily on storage to make their operation work. Next chart. So it's also important to look at California's future projections. So this is the Integrated Resource Plan that PUC and other agencies put together. The most important thing is, many of you may have known, we had 2 bills that go back about 6 or 8 years, 2514, which was called the Energy Storage Bill, and 2868, which supplemented that. Those 2 bills together required the utilities to put out about 2,000 megawatts of energy storage on the grid. They had to approve the projects by 2020 and install them by 2024. And what's been happening lately is the utilities are finding other applications, what they call non-wired solutions. So energy storage is becoming a preferred technology solution when it works, and it provides clean energy and also provides reliability. So if you look at that picture, we're expecting to fully install those 2,400 megawatts in the 2021 to 23 timeframe, but they're still projecting by 2030, and that's to meet our 60% RPS goal, that we're going to need close to 10,000 megawatts, so another 7,500 megawatts over the next 7 years. So the picture for energy storage is very rosy. Of those 2,400 megawatts that are listed there, I would have to say 90 to 95% of those projects are lithium ion right now. And there are a couple of reasons for that. And one of the primary reasons is the investment community will invest in lithium ion, but they will not invest in advanced batteries, flywheels, flow batteries, and other types. And so part of our research is to get those investors' attention and allow them to pick and choose technology so that in the future we will have more options and not have all of our investment in one single technology. Next chart. And as you mentioned, SB 100, the goal for clean energy by 2045, and I understand that now 14 states, counting California, have accepted or have approved a goal or have a legislative goal in that range. All I want to point out here is if you look at the modeling we're doing now, we just had a public workshop about 2 weeks ago. It's talking about a range of another, and beyond 2030, so another 20 to 30 gigawatts or 20 to 30,000 megawatts of energy storage will be needed to meet the goals that we foresee in 2045. So again, when you look at these technologies we're talking about, the opportunity for them to perform and get acceptance is high. And I think a lot of the agencies are looking for diversification, but they have to prove themselves first. Next chart. So as I mentioned, for us, 2020 was a big year, certainly since I've been at the commission. $100 million between our funds and match funds that have been awarded and will be awarded in the next few months, all of that in the 2020 timeframe. We are evaluating both lithium and non-lithium ion, but a lot of that effort is on non-lithium ion technologies. We want to understand where the new and emerging technologies are and what potential they offer. And we also want to take some of the products that are closer to commercialization and help them get over that hump of where they can get most of the end customers. When you buy energy storage, most of the end customers would prefer a power purchase agreement as opposed to paying for everything up front. But to have a power purchase agreement, you need a financing organization willing to finance your technology for 10, 20, or 10, 15, 20 years. And that's the challenge we have right now. So these demonstration projects, we're hoping will give that investment community the confidence they need to begin to invest. And then we think we'll see more and more of these non-lithium ion technologies competing. In fact, in the long term, we believe they'll be able to provide a better product, cheaper product, and a safer product. But again, we have to prove that. And the other thing that we're doing here, I'll talk about, is looking at the 2045 timeframe. One of the questions of all that storage that we have, the 2,400, almost all of it is 4 hours or less. And so we begin to look at technologies that can provide 10 to 20 hours, 48 to 30, 36 to 48 hours, or 100 plus hours. And then we're doing some analysis to determine what long-term storage role would be. In the past, long-term storage was basically pumped hydro. And there's a little bit of compressed air, but not much. But pumped hydro was the primary one. So there are new technologies that can provide 100 hours of storage for a very competitive price if they're able to reach their goals. Next chart. So what I'm going to do now, you mentioned in particular, so we had 5 different solicitations in this area. Each of them had different purposes, and I'm going to just go through a quick rundown to explain the technology that we selected and the purpose that we're looking for. So the first of the solicitations, and we awarded about $8 million for the first, and another 8, so about 16, 17 million in this particular project. There are 5 grants. These are emerging technologies that are looking to do their first field demonstration. So they have proven their technology in the laboratory, and now they want to build it and put out their first system, or they've built their first system and they want to put their first commercial system into the field. So Antora is a long-term storage. They're looking to build 100 hours of storage, and they're looking to hit a price point that's 10% or less of the current price of energy storage. Many of you may have heard of Form Energy. They have some pretty powerful backers, and they've been around. They recently signed an agreement with us to do 10 kilowatts for 100 hours. They're 100-hour storage. They also are looking to provide a price that's 10% or less of current kilowatt-hour prices. And they just signed an agreement back east to build a 1 megawatt system for 150 hours. So we're seeing that technology begin to flourish, but they're still in the process of demonstration. Zinc, and you'll see the next chart, please. You'll see that zinc is if you look at lithium ion, probably zinc is the next metal that's the most popular for energy storage, and it does appear to be able to provide performance equal to or better than lithium if given a chance. So we have projects where we are doing zinc batteries at the residential level, the commercial level, and the industrial level. So these projects are all going to have a chance to demonstrate their capability. Some of them are looking for 25 to 50 hours of storage. Some of them are looking to provide residential homes the storage they need to ride through these PS events that California has, or to provide the reliability, resiliency that a home would have, and the size that they would fit in your garage, or they would fit something about the size of your outside air conditioner. Next chart. So the other new area we looked at, I mean, hydrogen is a big topic right now, and green hydrogen is really important. And California has a special bill, SB 1369, that defines green hydrogen as energy storage and allows us to do this kind of research. So we awarded 2 grants with 2 companies that are hydrogen experts. In one case, they're putting a green hydrogen system at the Palmdale Water District and to be able to use the wind system to generate hydrogen and use the hydrogen on the water district for reliability, resiliency. And the second one is building a hydrogen system that if it works properly, it will fit microgrids and be able to provide long-term protection for microgrids. So this is a new area for us. There's not a lot of green hydrogen projects. There's a lot of laboratory work being done. In this case, these 2 projects had to have hydrogen or electricity in and renewable, generate hydrogen and electricity out. A lot of these hydrogen projects just want to put hydrogen in a tank and say you use it however you want. But we wanted this to be comparable to energy storage. So these 2 projects provide electricity in and electricity out as a product. And so we're allowing us to compare their performance to other energy storages. And we may find that for small scale, 100 kilowatts or 500 kilowatts, this doesn't work as well as it might work for 5 megawatts. And that's what we want to know. We want to know, obviously, in our transition to the clean environment, hydrogen plays a big role, and we want to know what the role for hydrogen storage will be. And that's why we're doing these demonstration projects. The next chart. So the next we shifted to is, I did a lot of research, and as I said, most of the technologies today are 2 to 4 hours, 4 to 6 hours is the max, but usually around 4 hours. We found out that 8 to 10 to 12 hours was kind of the next technology hurdle. So we did a solicitation where we specifically asked for 10 hours or more of storage. And the first group here, these 2 had to provide 400 kilowatts for 10 hours. And so we have 2 projects here. The first one is at a Native American tribe. And they actually are providing 2 solutions. So they're doing a flow battery, an Infinity, for 10 hours of 400 kilowatts, and a flywheel for 4 hours for 10 hours at 400 kilowatts. So they can deliver 400 kilowatts for 20 hours or 800 kilowatts for 10 hours. And so they'll be doing that on a Native American tribe, providing reliability, resiliency to that tribe and all the operations it has. The Indian Energy Project here on the right is actually at the Pendleton Marine Corps Station in Southern California, or in San Diego. Here they're looking at doing 3 different types of technologies: flow batteries, advanced batteries, and flywheels. And they have a test stand where they're going to evaluate the different technologies, how they perform at a smaller scale, about 50 kilowatts, and then they're going to select a combination or the technology that works the best for the military. And then they're going to install a 400 kilowatt 10-hour system at their on the base there at Pendleton. So it's a good opportunity for the military to kind of kick the tires with different technologies. Next chart, please. So one of the things we also did, again, a lot of our research is focused on application as much as technology. So we had a special group just for Native American tribes. We awarded 2 projects here. They had to provide 50 kilowatts for 10 hours and then provide it into a realistic application. So Grid Alternatives is supporting a Native American tribe in the area of their fire station and the support around that. And they are doing a flow battery for 10 hours. And then Indian Energy is doing a separate project, again, with flywheels for 10 hours of storage, also at a Native American tribe. It's supporting their critical water treatment facility so that during disturbances, they won't lose their clean drinking water. Next chart, please. So also pumped hydro, and this is a case of a disadvantaged community. A lot of these abandoned wells and abandoned water wells are in disadvantaged communities. So this particular project will be doing an aquifer pumped hydro where they put the water down in the well and take the water back out for energy storage. And so this is an interesting project for us because there's a lot of discussion about seasonal storage. And to do seasonal storage, you need to have energy storage that doesn't require energy to keep it loaded. So if you have a if you have a pumped hydro, you can pump it up and it'll sit there. If you have a compressed air, you have to keep the air compressed. If you have a lithium-ion battery, you got to keep the battery charged. So if you charge it in July and don't use it, it's going to die. In this case, we're looking at hydrogen and pumped hydro are 2 good chances for seasonal storage. This is a project that you can basically charge the water system and it can sit there for months without losing energy. So one of the involvements for us in the analysis and research phase is seasonal storage something worth investing in California when it comes to meeting our long-term goals, and would that seasonal storage provide us the critical energy we need, like we had just a few weeks ago when we had a heat storm and we were very, very close to losing power on the grid because there was such a high demand. It was 112 degrees and smoky, and it's just a really difficult time. So seasonal storage could play a role. And this is a project where we're going to be able to do a little research in that area. Next chart. The other area that's unique, and right now California has a new rule that all new homes have to have solar on their roofs starting this year. And so most of the builders tell us that most of the new homes will end up having energy storage and solar in their design. So we put some research projects out, and these are 3 different contractors. Most of this is lithium ion because that's the technology of choice. They are going to be evaluating, EPRI is going to be evaluating other technologies. But these are just 3 different companies who are putting out their different approaches. They had to do 15 sites, and they had to do it in 3 different climate zones. But it's all residential, and they're going to both be looking at resiliency and energy savings, and how does the residential customer, maximize the savings to their bill when they have solar and storage together. And today, with peak demand being 6 to 9 and 5 to 8, it's a lot easier than before when it was 12 to 6. So we do believe that these things could end up making a pretty substantial savings for the residential home, and we believe this might be a market that will expand throughout the nation pretty fast. Next chart. So the other part here, this is, we mentioned, of course, the governor came out with a big executive order yesterday. We already had a goal of 5 million vehicles, electric vehicles by 2030, and we now have a goal to convert all standard cars and smaller vehicles to electric by 2035. This is using recycled electric car batteries. So normally a car battery will last 5 to 7 to 8 years, and when it no longer has the power it needs for the car, it still has a lot of energy and can be used from 5 to 10 to 15 years in an energy mode. So these next 4 projects are applications of where we are looking at using recycled electric vehicle batteries in a second use, and we're trying to evaluate what's the safety of those, what is the reliability of those, how long will they last, what's their power profile. So next chart. So we have 4 different grants where we're actually looking at different ways to reuse existing batteries. Currently, California has 50% of the electric vehicles in the country, And if, with our particular goals, we expect that to expand, and then that means in the future we'll have the largest number of available second life batteries to use also. So this research helps us understand how what the cost comparison is for using second life batteries. The general belief is a second life battery can be filtered for half the price of a new battery, and that's the goal they're shooting for. Next chart. So the other thing I mentioned before for SB 100 and the goal we have for 2045 is we awarded 2 grants. These are study grants or modeling grants, E3 and UC Merced, to look at long duration storage, to look at the mixture of what the grid will look like in 2045, and to determine what is the role of long duration storage versus 4 hours of storage. You know, is there a combination that makes sense? Is it better to have 12 hours of storage or 3 times 4? And also, you know, is there different sizes and shapes? As I mentioned earlier, one of the big potentials that we have on some of these thermal storages, if they can actually come in with a price tag that's 10% of the current storage, which is about $200 to $300 a kilowatt, so we're talking $10 to $15 a kilowatt, which they believe they can make, then that's a pretty big game changer on where energy storage can even, for example, replace, if you have 100 hours of storage that's $10 a kilowatt, it can actually replace a natural gas plant. So when a natural gas plant is ready to be retired or replaced, you can replace that plant with the energy storage as opposed to putting in another natural gas plant. And to meet our SB 100 goals right now, natural gas does not meet that. If you use carbon capture and storage for natural gas plants, you only capture about 85% of the contaminants, so you still have to do some kind of air capture to get to 100%. So it becomes a fairly costly solution. And if some of these emerging technologies can prove themselves as being performing and reliable, it's very likely that we could replace not as peaker plants, but actual generation plants in the future. We could replace those with energy storage as opposed to a fossil fuel system. Next chart. So the last one to talk about is, in fact, one of the areas we also focus on is helping energy storage get fielded, helping them assess. One of the challenges we have, people have come to us and come to the governor's office. Is this a legislation actually direct us to do this? AB 546. And that is a guidebook to help the local people and the agencies having jurisdiction, in other words, the counties and the cities and the agencies that have to permit this energy storage. So this guidebook will be focusing on energy storage a megawatt or less, and on customer side of the meter, and it will help those agencies streamline their permitting process. It will help them understand any challenges or risk and how to address those. And so we're hoping this will take what could take as much as 10 to 12 months to bring that down to 4 to 6 weeks. And we think that's going to happen. Eventually, this guidebook will be managed by the Governor's Office of Policy and Research. So we're developing the guidebook. There will be a 2-year period where this contractor will provide support for it. And then we're hoping that if it's successful, then we'll pass it over to the governor's office and they'll maintain it for the future through their, with their overall authority. And the other thing that this particular guidebook is going to be able to do, this particular contractor, is they're going to be able to integrate the online. There's an online solar app right now that's free for people to use where you can go in and design solar for your facility. And this app will now allow you to look at solar and storage together and design what makes sense with not just solar or not just storage, but integrating the two together. And this will be an electronic guidebook that can be updated very easily. And I think that's been a lot pretty fast, but I wanted to give time for questions at the end. I think the next chart is just a discussion chart. And so I'm happy to open up for questions. And if you want to read those for me, I'll be happy to provide the answers or any general discussion anybody wants to have.
Great. Thanks, Mike. You flew through a lot of information there, and we've got some questions piling up. So first, let's visit costs. Can you, I don't know if you have any cost indications or costs that you're shooting for, but let's say comparing zinc ion batteries with lithium ion batteries, what are the costs now, and what do you have a goal for what
So
the
I
cost might
I
be
can
for
tell you
some
what
of these solutions?
I can tell you what I see on the internet, and that's what we see in the real world. So I've been following this for a long time. The cost of energy storage has dropped so much in the last decade and the last 5 years. In general, I would say if you're looking to buy lithium ion batteries today, you're probably looking at a price that's $200 to $300 per kilowatt hour. And that number is projected to go down to maybe 100 or less in the next few years or 5 years. So and what happens with that is that kind of sets a baseline for these emerging technologies. I have this discussion with new companies all the time saying, if you can't reach this price point, then you're not going to be able to compete. Now, it turns out that many of the emerging technologies think they can meet or exceed that price point. It depends. The other thing about longer duration storage is when you do longer duration storage, it actually the economics gets better on a per kilowatt hour basis. So you can actually drop that price substantially if you're buying 20 hours of storage versus 4 hours of storage. So I think in general, there was a time when $500 to $600 was the minimum you could find for any kind of system. I think a lot of the research systems are still probably in that $300 to $500 per kilowatt range, but with their advancements and cost reduction and manufacturing savings, they can bring that down. But I think the general cost number that most people are looking for is $100 to $150 a kilowatt, and I think that's a DOE goal. It's in that 200 to 100 range that they published many years ago. But in today's world, I think that's the number you're going to see. It does make a difference on power because it depends on how you apply it. But most of the time, per kilowatt hour is the standard most people use.
Great, thanks. So it seems like much of your work is focused on long duration storage. Can you talk more about what is long duration storage? You've mentioned some technologies that are 100 hours, and then I think, for example, the zinc batteries, you mentioned 20 to 50 hours of storage. Is that all considered long duration storage? And besides the zinc batteries, the compressed air storage, and the pumped hydro, what other long duration storage technologies
So
are in
I need
development?
I'll give a little bit of a background here. So we work with the universities, and the University of Stanford has a group of really highly qualified students that are graduate students and PhD students and undergraduate students, and they have an energy group, and they came to me and said, do you have a project we can do for you that we can learn from and you'd be interested in? I said, sure. So I said, I'll give you a list of 10 companies or more, you can find more, that are interested in long duration storage. This was 2 years ago. I used this knowledge to help me prepare what we just awarded this year. And I asked them, I said, I want you to call these companies up and ask them a simple question. Why? Why are you investing all your money into a product that nobody says we need yet? And there isn't a defined requirement. In California, I mentioned that the majority of our energy storage, lithium ion storage, has 4-hour capability. There's a specific reason for that. And the California Independent System Operator has a market, and for you to use that energy storage in what they call the resource adequacy market, or for the utility to be paid to have that storage, it has to have a minimum of 4 hours. And that's what's been driving most of our systems, so they can actually get reimbursed for the storage that they're providing. I've looked at different opportunities, and like I said before, to me, technology-wise, 8 to 10 hours seems to be the next break. 24 to 48 hours seems to be another big break before you get to 100. And so in California, what's happened that's brought this to bear has been the wildfires and the contingency issues we have in the PSPS event. So in November of last year, over 2 million people in California were impacted by wildfire PSPS events. The average short outage was 11 hours, and some of it went as high as 3 to 5 days. So what happens is, if you look at things like hospitals and you look at senior homes in areas that have critical life-saving equipment, right now they run that on diesel generators as their backup plan, and they can do that for a while until they have to get more diesel fuel, and it gets hard to get it sometimes. So we were talking for California's future, a clean alternative. So I think in the long distance market, resiliency and reliability is clearly the big one. And so if you can make it the first 24 hours, that is a big hump. If you can get the first 24 hours, then now you're in an environment where you're talking maybe 5% of the time you can't make it. If you can make it a second day, it's even more. So right now, the hospitals and fire stations have a legal requirement, a legislative requirement. They have 3 days of backup power that they do with generators. That's only for their critical facilities, not for everything. So when we look at that, we start talking about, okay, now long-term storage is maybe 12 hours, maybe 24 hours in that reliability environment. And so what technologies fit that market? Well, lithium ion doesn't. If you have lithium ion for 4 hours, you got to buy 3 times to get 12. And at 3 times the cost, there's no cost savings. But flow batteries and other types of technologies can provide that 12 hours of storage for a much cheaper price. So as we evolve into this future of SB 100 and future of living with the contingencies the state has to live with, we're finding that there is a need for this, I'll say initially 10 to 14 hours of protection, because the general belief, if you have solar and 10 or 12 hours, you can ride through the first 24 hours and not lose your power, because you can use the solar during the day and the storage at night. And then you need another probably 20 to 24 hours to be able to make it for the second day. And then, of course, the other element is when it talks about meeting the needs of the grid, what we're trying to figure out now is if you have continuous storage for 12 hours, is that more valuable than 4 hours to 3 different locations? And we don't know the answer to that question. But I think what's happening is there's a lot of attention in there. Seasonal storage is one I understand, struggle with a little bit, because the concept of charging a battery in July and sitting there for 6 months and using it once in December and not using it again to next July, to me seems like a very costly proposition. But you have to wait and see what it costs to store that energy. So I think we are spending a lot of time right now, because we have literally hundreds of examples of 4 hours or 4 to 6 hours or 2 to 4 hours. So we understand that market, and we're working that's really in a price reduction market. But how you build long duration storage and 100 hours of storage that can support the grid, 100 hours, 150 hours of storage that can place a natural gas power plant with clean storage is a clear opportunity in the future that we don't have right now. And there are probably, in my case, 4 to 6 companies that I know of that are working in that 100-hour plus market, and they believe that they can compete on price in that market once they are able to build their system to scale. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, and actually you've led me and started answering my next clarifying question, seasonal storage. So my understanding was that seasonal storage is something that you charge the technology over a week or several weeks, and then you do a slow discharge, perhaps over several weeks as well. But it seems like what you were talking about was more really seasonal. You build up in one season, you discharge the next season. So I'm wondering if you could clarify and explain what is seasonal storage, how frequent is the discharge, and what's the case for seasonal storage?
So I've had people help me a little bit. So I mean, the general concept of seasonal is charge during the summer and use it off peak. But that's kind of a simplistic approach. I think what's more likely to be seasonal storage is 100 hours, 150 hours of storage. So when you have 100 hours of storage and you use it on a daily basis, but you only use half of it, you don't use it all. And then when something happens that you need to use a full 100, you've got it there in your hip pocket. So as opposed to saying, I've got 100 hours of storage and I'm going to discharge all 100 hours before I recharge it. So that's another way of talking about seasonal storage, is you build a capacity that's really there year round. And that to me makes a lot more sense, because now you're using it on a daily basis or weekly basis and you're generating revenue from it. But when you have this or emergency that you didn't expect, and some key power plant or some key activity happens, some key line goes down, and now you need to use that storage for 3 days instead of 1 day, you have it. So I think that's probably a better analogy for seasonal storage than my concept of, charge it up in July and don't use it again till December. So I think the technology we talked about is thermal storage, pumped hydro, and hydrogen are the three technologies that seem to be the most valid for looking at. But we're just starting to look into that. So even, as you say, even a definition of what is seasonal storage, I suspect if you got in a room with people interested in it, you'd get 4 or 5 different definitions. There wouldn't be one definition that everybody would agree on.
Okay. Well, thanks for the clarification. So our next question comes from New York. Jason from New York writes, we've struggled in New York getting non-lithium systems built. In every case, it's always come back to a customer or an investor's reluctance to invent a solution that's not backed by a massive manufacturer. What are you seeing as the path forward for these non-lithium systems?
So we're seeing the exact same issue, and I've talked to the manufacturers, the customers, and the financiers. And what it comes down to is, in the big picture, what can we do? What does that company need to do to build confidence? And I have to be honest with you, I've been here a long time, and there have been quite a few storage companies that have gone bankrupt or have not made it through. And there's a concern this year because of the coronavirus, we could lose some really good technologies that just can't ride through the economics of no business for a while. But I think to me, I think what we have to do is, I go back to the early days before lithium ion, before 2514. There were no big 500 or 50 or 100 megawatt storage plants, anywhere other than a big compressed air plant. So the market embraced lithium ion storage very rapidly and it continued because it performed, and they were able to deliver projects, and there are 50 megawatts, 100 megawatt plants were being built and performed successfully. We did have and continue to have fires are one of the challenges for these large plants. That it's not a massive problem, but it is a consideration. So there wasn't a huge amount of data available. Now, I think in the lithium ion market, because of the electric vehicle market, there was that manufacturing structure, the mining and worldwide mining. There's environmental justice issues with some of the mining issues around the world and things like that. But the bottom line answer is there is this huge infrastructure that could generate these batteries, and everybody wants them, and they're using them. You just don't have that same infrastructure right now for, I'll say, flow batteries or flywheels or zinc-based batteries, but you do have the opportunity and you do have companies. So I think it's going to have to be, I don't know if there's going to be, Tesla is a big company with big, they're a company who does use lithium ion. But I'm saying you need a comparable company like that has the reach and the resources to do it. I think if California continues to meet these goals that we have, and I actually went to the PUC 2 years ago and briefed, and then Commissioner Peterman, who was in charge of the storage program, I said, do you know what you're doing? Do you see what's happening? You're buying all these systems, but you're only buying one technology. Can you find a way to buy other technologies? And she really wanted to, and I agree. And I said, the problem is I can't give you. And she said, okay, what's my rising opportunities? Where should I focus my attention? I said, and I actually called, 30 to 40 companies and said, okay, in California, when you're doing these awards, the minimum award was 10 megawatts for 4 hours, 10 megawatts, 40 megawatt hours. And so I would ask these companies, flow batteries, flywheels, advanced technologies, compressed air, or even a thermal, when can you build a 10 megawatt 4-hour battery? And most of them said they hadn't even thought about it. And the ones who said, oh, you give me the money, I'll build it, I had a little credibility issue. So that was a challenge, is you don't have those. Now, these projects that we have are going to bring to table a lot more expertise, and NYSERDA is supporting projects, DOE is supporting projects. So I think over the next 5 years, I tell everybody that lithium ion is still going to be the primary technology for the next 5 years. But I think by the end of that 5-year period, there'll be competitors out there that can provide products as good or better for the same price or less of lithium ion. And I think if over time there will be more. But right now, there's a real challenge, and you have to find an advanced company or a customer willing to take a little risk. I just don't think we're quite there yet. This whole effort this year that we are doing, we advocated with our own internal management, was to make that leap and say, let's do enough technologies that all of them aren't going to make it, but some of them should. And our hope is if there are technologies 5 years from now that are competing on a commercial basis with lithium ion, they'll come out of this pool or a similar pool of demonstration projects.
Great, thanks. And you have answered many listeners' questions of when will these technologies be ready for prime time? So let's move on to our next question, which is also a clarifying question. So earlier you mentioned that storage is eventually going to replace not just peaker plants, but base load generation plants. Can you walk us through that scenario again?
Well, that's a Mike Gravy prediction. That's not an industry prediction. So I've been fortunate to be involved with this at the Commission for almost 20 years, and the whole process of doing everything. I spent 10 years doing carbon capture and storage for natural gas plants and the design of natural gas plants. And so what happened to me was I started looking at, over the last couple of years, in particular the last year, at these technologies that are coming out that can produce 100 or 150 hours of storage at a price that's, say, 10 or 15 or $20 a kilowatt, or even $5 or $10 a kilowatt. You start pricing it out to what is the levelized cost of energy, and you say, holy moly, these guys are cheaper. So if this can work, if they can deliver 100 or 150 hours, and the ISO has a couple of these plants, they can generate power all the time, because during the summer, during the daytime, they can charge and discharge at the same time, basically, if you design it properly, so they can always be full. And so I started looking at this, because one of the questions I mentioned, we have a natural gas program, and one of our research areas is, what's the future for the natural gas program? How do we go forward, and what do we do? And of course, if it's a fossil fuel, and 25 SB 100 says you need to have all clean fuel, then the two of them don't match. We have to find a way to make that work. Now, green hydrogen and renewable natural gas are the current proposed solution. But all I'm saying is, when I asked that question of the university 2 years ago, when I started looking into what are the applications, where could I find an application for storage that is a real application, that's a repeatable application, and it would be a worldwide application, that's where I started looking at, well, I mean, this whole concept of power plants and how do you do that is an opportunity. Because right now we're talking about something in the range of $200 a kilowatt hour. If we drop that down to $10 or $20 a kilowatt hour, that's a changing that changes everything. And so, but I have to also caveat, no one's done that yet, but there are a lot of smart people, and they're very close, and there's a lot of opportunity. So I think over the next 5 to 10 years, it is possible to do that. And it is, I mean, we got 25 years to get to where we want to go. A lot of our power plants will age out in that time frame. And the question would be, well, maybe we start replacing those and see if it works, or we do a couple of those. So, I mean, we don't have any 100-hour storage systems with the exception of pumped hydro, and that's seasonal. In California, you can't always depend on pumped hydro when you have a drought year, you know, and so those areas. So there's every technology has its challenges. And so hydrogen is another one that has a lot of promise, and we're not there yet, but it's another promise. You could end up with hydrogen systems that could replace natural gas systems if they're green hydrogen and they're using it that way. But I think to answer your question, when I looked at what are the applications for long duration storage, I come up with two big ones: resiliency for 1 or 2 days on critical facilities, and the long shot or the home run out of the park would be for these long duration storage to be successful. And then all of a sudden now, because these would be power plant size systems, they wouldn't be something you put in your backyard or you'd put in a big plant. You need a big facility, so they would be the same size as a power plant. But in fact, they could potentially meet the technical needs. So I see that as an opportunity. I don't know the whole industry agrees with me, but it's just what I see from 20 years of doing research and trying to find markets for energy storage where the energy storage makes money. And it's but without having to be, you know, one of the issues we run into is when do we get to the point where the technology can make it without a government grant? So we use the government grant to prime the pump. But if the government grant becomes a pump, it's never going to work. So if we're going to prime the pump and they get it and then they become commercial, that's a success, and that's what we're hoping for. That is ultimately our goal in this, and the EPIC program is to bring new technologies to California that wouldn't be there without our help. But when they get there, they're on their own. They don't need grants anymore. They're making business because their product is cost effective and profitable. Anyway, that's the best answer I can give.
Well, thank you for giving us a glimpse into your crystal ball there. But so speaking of new technologies, a few questions have come up about whether you've considered other technologies. So people were curious if you have funded or received proposals for capacitor storage, ammonia storage, or green methane storage.
So we have, and so well, fortunately, we have a grant program that provides up to, I think, $150,000 or $200,000 now for new programs, and if they're successful, they can get a follow-on grant for another couple, $300,000. For the research project that we did here, we had a criteria where you had to be at a certain TRL level. So for the early stage ones, you had to have an operating system that you designed and built, and you had to be able to build a full system. And for the commercial one where we did the 10 hours of storage or something, you had to have an operating system that you were going to expand. So you had to have something that worked for 4 to 6 hours, and you were now going to make it 10 hours. So those technologies don't always fit there, but we do have a very aggressive program in our here at Cal Seed, it's called, and it's a seeding program. So we look at all those. I talk to technology providers all the time. And so we have opportunity. That's the only one we have that really starts at the early stages. Most of our work is our goal is to commercialize a product in 3 to 5 years, if possible, 5 to 7 years, but not 20 to 30 years or 10 to 20 years. So that's where we draw. So when we did these solicitations, the bidders had to prove to us that they had a system that was ready for this level of advancement. And so a lot of technologies just couldn't reach that barrier, but they do have opportunities both from DOE and SBIR and for us and Exceed. So there are grant programs to help them get to that point. But in our case, and the ones I've discussed here today, all of those are systems that are much closer to commercialization than they are to early development.
Thank you. Is any of your research focused on storage solutions or power for electric vehicles?
So there's another office in our that does. Yeah, we do all of that, and even from the perspective of alternatives to lithium ion for the car, we're looking at hydrogen stations for hydrogen cars. We're looking at developing fast charging stations that have energy storage, so that a car can come in and get a charge in 10 to 15 minutes or 5 to 10 minutes instead of an hour or half an hour, which charges a lot of energy and could cause disruptions on the grid. So we're looking at fast chargers and how we can use storage for that. So and of course the Energy Commission has a whole division, a transportation division, committed to electrification. So we provide them the early stage, and then they provide the commercial opportunity. They're out there sponsoring charging stations and sponsoring demonstrations for electric buses, electric cars. So we do a full spectrum. In my case, I get involved with using energy storage so that we can charge vehicles and not disrupt the grid, or we can use those vehicles to support the grid. So that's the area that we have many projects. It just isn't part of this particular. So you saw about 24, 25 grants. We award over 100 grants a year in our division. And so those other areas are where we would be doing the electric vehicle type of work.
That makes sense. Thanks for that clarification. Speaking of the awards, where do the sources of match and the cost sharing come from?
So when we do a solicitation, we prefer cash. In other words, the company comes in and they're putting cash on the table, and they get extra credit for that. But match funds can be in-kind support. It can be another grant. If you have a DOE grant to do something and this project's going to expand that, you can use the DOE funding. You can use Department of Defense funding. You can use, we have people using CPUC programs like SGIP programs. So there is in our GFO, there's a whole section that explains exactly what counts as match and what doesn't. But basically, it has to be real dollars, but it doesn't have to be, it can be other grants as long as it's not a CEC grant. In other words, you can't take one CEC grant and use it for cost share for another one. But if you got a PUC grant or a DOE grant or federal other program grant, you can use those funds as cost share to grow that program, expand that program. They have to be relevant. In other words, you can't say, I've got money here for electric vehicles and I want to use it over here for a microgrid. You can only do that if the electric vehicles is part of the microgrid. So they have to be relevant, but there are lots of opportunities to leverage other programs with the funding so that you can use other program funds and you don't have to have the cash out of the company's checkbook. But I will say, it comes to match fair, two things I've learned in my career doing this. If you give something away, in other words, if you pay 100% from the government, it never works. It'll never work. You have to have, the company who's doing this has to have some skin on the table, or the customer has to be involved. So you need that part. In our case, 20% is our standard. For some of our demonstrations, 50%. But typically when we do 50%, we're talking about companies that are big enough that they can afford to do that, and they've got that capital that they can leverage. Most of our research grants are in the range of 20%. The grant that we did, the early one, the 5 grants that I mentioned, and the hydrogen ones didn't require any cost share. You got extra credit for cost share, but you didn't have to have cost share. So when we do some of our early stage ones, we understand how critical funding are. So some of our grants do not require cost share, but the closer you get to commercialization, the more we think you can benefit and the more you can leverage, and we raise the cost share as you get closer and closer to commercialization.
Thank you for that, Mike. Well, given that we're closing in on the hour, I just wanted to ask 2 quick clarifying questions before we wrap up. A release date on the Energy Storage Guidebook, I believe, did you say 2 years is your estimate?
So the guidebook should be ready in a year.
A year.
And then there'll be 2 years, and it'll be publicly available and public training and full access. So there's no cost to use it, and it's going to be designed so they will take them about a year. We're supposed to award the grant within a few weeks here if we haven't already awarded it, and it'll take them about a year to develop it. And then so anybody who wants to use it, and you can call and get help. It'll be all online, and it'll be available for anybody who has access to the internet. So there's no restrictions, and there is training available. And so the other states that are online here, then we hope that you'll be able to use this as we go forward. And obviously, from my perspective, if you're interested, there are, for the states that are here, there are reviews that we'll have in the next 3 to 6 months where we'll have public ability for you to be able to listen in and ask questions and understand and help us understand if it's not doing something it should, why. We want to make it as valuable as possible. And so that's our goal, to do that. And then again, that's why we have the 2 years of continual support, so that if we make changes, then we can fix those and we can update the document. And then at the end, we'll either award a follow-on contract or a new contract, or the governor's office will pick it up however they want to do that. But I would encourage anybody here who's interested, just reach out to me and I'll let you know. We're going to be starting that over the next year. And there will be opportunities for people to kind of find out what's happening, and we will be looking for demonstration sites. Obviously, our focus is California, but we would be happy to do some outside of California.
That's exciting, and I would be happy to share the release of that guidebook amongst the CISA members when it comes out, and get you some feedback. And I think attending a live walkthrough or a training sounds terrific. So that is all we have time for. I want to thank you, Mike, for an excellent presentation and such thorough Q&A. I think we all learned a lot, and I'd like to let our audience know that we have some upcoming webinars. Sam, next slide. Thanks. Monday, September 28th, an introduction to virtual power plants, and then Friday, October 9th, we're going to be taking a look at Nantucket's energy storage system, which has been in place for a little over a year now. So I hope you'll be able to join us then. Thanks everyone for listening in. Thank you for your questions, and have a great day.